Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Riker, and I'd like to introduce and include our next presenter. First of all, the topic. We have an advisory group on AI and sign language interpreting. We've been working together, collaborating to create a report which we're presenting to a larger group, which is called Interpreter Safe AI. And it's a task force, it's a larger group. So we have a report to present to them. And we're going to talk about what's in the report now, why we wanted to expand on certain areas and what's been included. So we have 3 individuals who've been involved in working on this report, including myself. So again, I'm Tim Riker, so I'll be presenting. We'll also hear from Star Grieser. She is the executive director of the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, a national organization. We also have Jeff Shaul. And Jeff is involved with GoSign AI. He's very involved in the technology and working with that company. So if we could have everyone join us in the front of the room, pick your own seats.
Hello.
Everybody ready? Hi, good morning. My name is Star Grieser. I'm the CEO of Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf. It's a gigantic interpreting organization. We could take care of certification and the professional development of ASL interpreters. And I am the CEO.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Shaul. I am the co-founder and a developer at 2 companies currently, one of which is GoSign AI, which specializes in sign language interpreting games, as well as an ASL educational games.
Great, so let's do this. We're going to talk about Safe AI Task Force, and we're also going to give you some notion of what Safe AI means. It's an advocacy group for the fair and ethical use of AI in interpreting. We invented ourselves in 2023. We work on a variety of topics related to sign language research, spoken language interpreting, RID, various companies and language providers. This is a pretty multifaceted task force. And we've talked a lot about developing guidelines for how AI research should be conducted. How it's gonna, we developed a survey on the perceptions of this. And we want to make sure that individuals have all the information they need, you know, so that before Congress and legislators start making decisions and setting things up using AI, we want to make sure that they've heard from us and they understand our perspective. So we set up this task force back in August of 2023. Am I going too fast? I'm sorry, I was so nervous. I just kind of stopped. I didn't stop to breathe and really get going. So hi, everybody, and thank you for moving over, interpreter. So the task force. That was set up in 2023. We started developing guidelines, and we want to include spoken language interpreting as well as ASL agencies. At the same time, we feel like spoken language, in some ways, they've already experienced their own disasters. ASL is in a whole other place. We're still working on this. And although there are some parallels for sure, and maybe it is possible to use sign language translation somehow. We don't really know what that looks like, but we want to make sure that ASL and the deaf community have a voice in this process. We want to be part of the conversation. And so the timing is sensitive because spoken language interpreting in AI is ahead of us. We don't want to be running to catch up. So we set up our own advisory group that's deaf focused, and that's Deaf Safe AI. You can see the hashtag right above me. Oh, yep. Okay, so artificial intelligence and how it's used with language interpreting. The three of us are here in person. My colleague Jeff and Tim both will be presenting. And we also have Anne Marie Killian, who is here virtually. She's a participant, but she's not involved in this particular panel, but you will see her here by this weekend online. Again, our goal of Deaf Safe AI is to make sure that we, deaf people, are involved in the design and leadership of automatic interpreting and artificial intelligence. We want to be a part of this, and our input is crucial. Our perceptions, our experience, and everything. We don't want it to march on and leave us behind. So we need to make sure that we are involved early and often. Now, every day we deaf people use technology and it impacts us, it affects us, and it benefits us. So, we're the end users, and there's laws, there's legislation, there are guidelines, but how do they pertain to AI? And we want to talk about that. We know it's coming. The deaf community has already experienced the impacts of the interpreting situation, the shortage of interpreting, et cetera. And then VRI came along, virtual interpreters. That was a hot new thing for a while there and still is. And also educational interpreting as a subspecialty. And we were not involved in the application of those things. And it did cause harm to our community. Now, based on that experience, we know AI is going to be harmful without our buy-in. And maybe that's the wrong sign, but certainly we are going to be impacted by it. We know it's coming. We know there could be benefits, but we also know that there could be harm. And we want to really steer the ship in such a way that we benefit and are not harmed. So, Safe AI. That task force is composed of many organizations. We know that hearing folks and spoken language folks have their own organizations, and they survey consumer perceptions. They send out big surveys and collect a lot of information all over the US, all over the world. I think there's something like 13 different language companies.
10 or 11, I think.
Or 10 or 11 languages, French, of course, English, Italian, Spanish. For us to be involved in that really doesn't make a lot of sense because ASL and the whole translation of it, a visual spatial language, requires a different type of technology. It requires video. It requires an entirely different platform. So we are, in order to be equal or aligned with what they're doing in spoken languages, and we totally understand that spoken language AI has transformed society. And Stephanie and others, all of us on the task force, are very interested in this, but we see barriers, we see problems with our visual spatial language, and we've decided that we need qualitative studies. So in the fall, we hosted 3 webinars, and we had deep discussions in the webinars about deaf people, consumers, their perspective of AI and how it could be used on an everyday basis, how it could enable access to communication, And in each webinar, we had, I don't know, 350 people involved. So now here we are, the group of people analyzing the information and the discourse. And certain themes have evolved over time. So we took those themes and we took the perceptions of deaf people on these themes and how it might affect everyday interaction. The larger task force has sent out surveys. They've gotten similar responses to the things we would expect. But here, focusing on the deaf community, we want to share our findings. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to show you some of the highlights of our analysis, but it's not a summary. We want to give you a chance to see what a theme might be and talk about it. But themes do evolve naturally, so we can't, put it down on a piece of paper and have it be the way things are. We're evolving over time, and we're evolving naturally. It's fascinating because nothing like this has ever happened before. So let me look at my own slide here. You might want to take a moment to read it. Okay. So again, we have the lens of a socio-technological system. How we socialize and communicate with each other, with other professionals, with children, with everyone in our families, all the different levels of communication that we participate in. And we want to make sure that those levels of participation and types of signing encounters are included in the consideration of AI. So we wanted you to see this frame that we developed in 2018. Interesting enough, we realized that our analysis had a lot of deaf wisdom. And what I mean by that is we are early adopters of technology. That is a known fact about deaf people. It's a great equalizer in so many ways that gives us access to the world. Technology has always done that. And whenever it's introduced to us, we are very early adopters, very enthusiastic adopters. But some things are harmful. And so we can anticipate if something is harmful, we can give feedback about the harms and outline what those harms are. And in many cases, research can identify that as well, and does.
Thank you, Star. At this point, I would like to make clear that this report is a result of 3 webinars, which consisted of thematic analysis and reoccurring themes. The themes that came as a result of this webinar are not necessarily a reflection of the deaf community at large. Deaf people are not a monolith. However, we do here focus on the results from these 3 webinars. We were able to categorize these results into technical quality, the actual quality of the technology being used in assisting that specific need. The second category was readiness. That was a primary theme of the constituents. Were we ready? Was the technology ready to meet the needs of these individuals? And then thirdly, results and continuity outcomes, both in the short term and long term of these things that are going on. Are these technologies appropriate for not only the short-term use, but also longevity? I'll go into a bit more depth regarding each of these three categories now. Looking at results and outcomes, we were able to divide these a bit further into subcategories. Again, this is a result of comments made during those webinars. There is individual consumer authority and independence. There were concerns expressed about the ability for individuals to have unique authority and autonomy. So for example, if you enter an airport, people give you prescriptive technology, whether or not this is your communication preference. That was a common theme, is a desire for autonomous preference over technology used. A second subcategory here is control at the cultural level. Looking at deaf people as a whole, one example of this would be control within the deaf community. That's many of us here today. The ability to gather and think tank and make decisions as we modulate the results and outcomes. The second category that we saw come up frequently throughout the course of these webinars was the quality of the technology. I can name a few major themes. The first of which is safeguards, safety and security. Some of these have simple applications, such as the ability to eavesdrop, and is technology eavesdropping on these confidential communications? Another concern is hacking and the ability to identify people's faces. Another is potential risk situations. So for example, individuals who may not feel comfortable using the technology in high risk situations, such as medical settings, courtrooms. There seemed to be an overall distrust of using technology in those settings and potential malfunctions of the technology, which could lead to life-altering consequences. We talked a great deal about modeling for machine learning as well, and what features are being identified currently. The machine learning model traditionally has focused only on hands, and we've identified that this is simply not sufficient. AIxAI covers a whole spectrum of communication, including non-manual facial morphemes, use of hands, body language, etc. And there was an overarching theme of, will technology be able to advance to a place that it can recognize these various linguistic aspects? Another subcategory here is data, which is a hot topic throughout the course of these webinars. There was a lot of discussion around what data is actually being used and who are the individuals both collecting the data and who is that data being collected from? What sources are we looking at? Are these individuals who were late deafened or perhaps learned sign language later in life? What levels of inclusion and exclusion were being used here within both the quality and language modalities or diversity of language? Is there effort to film people in controlled settings? And that may be nice and relevant in certain situations. However, if individuals don't have a camera pointed directly at them, perhaps for example, you're trying to use Siri, and it may be awkward to hold your phone in one hand and sign with your free hand. And so these are the kinds of adaptations that come into play when we talk about accessibility and availability of data in day-to-day life. We also talk about the use of different cameras and goggles and how that alters the perspective and therefore the dimensionality of language being made available. We talk about informed consent as well and the importance of informed consent. For example, if there is an individual signing, are they aware that their sign is being used for machine learning purposes? This will become forever used as a model of language in perpetuity. Another large theme that emerged as a result of these webinars was readiness. This can be broken down into several subcategories, which includes readiness of deaf American communities. Is the community at large ready for this technology? Are there any potential impacts for harm? And also, what are the potential or perceived benefits? Do individuals have a concrete understanding of how these results will be sustained and become ingrained into our sociocultural system long term? What are they looking for and what are the potential needs which we need to be aware of now so that we can educate individuals of how this will impact them going forward? We also talked about sign language recognition, SLR, in both translation for receptive use as well as expressive or generational use. Are we looking at this as a deaf community, as deaf individuals, and as sign language interpreters? We need to make sure people's needs are met in each community. Additionally, accountability. Where are potential safeguards which we can make use of, and what are the risks? For example, perhaps a medical professional asks for a list of an individual's medications, and one of the medications is incorrectly represented in that interpretation. Who is liable in these instances of failure? Is it the creator? Is it the creator of the model? Is it the hospital network? Does the doctor understand the potential for failure in these systems? And these are some tough philosophical questions that need to be wrestled with. These are all areas of concern and consideration worthy of our time and attention. I want to again emphasize that the populations present in these webinars are not representative of deaf people worldwide and the community at large. To bring this home then, there are those three categories: quality, readiness, as well as results and outcomes. Looking at this from a 1,000-foot view, we can talk about the socio-technical systems and how both the social and technology aspects are integrated. I'll hand it over to Tim at this point.
Thank you, Jeff, for that explanation to give us a foundation and understanding of the three main areas that have been identified. I'd like to shift a little bit and talk more about the healthcare industry and how decisions are made and the way new technologies are used. We've seen VRI affect our community, video remote interpreting services. We've seen implications of the way decisions are made in its usage. And there's research by someone named Chen about the pipeline for that decision-making process. If you take a moment to look at the slide, I'm going to go through each part individually. So don't worry, I know you're watching me sign and looking at the slides. I'll take it one piece at a time. So the first part has to do with who is in the position to recognize and identify the problem. What problem needs to be resolved? This could, for example, have to do with language access, And maybe the problem is financial in nature, or it may be a resource problem, as opposed to the fact that maybe you have an individual who's a member of the deaf community, whose language has been minoritized, and that individual is looking for equal access. So how do we identify the problem and potential solutions? I can control the slides, thanks. And now I'll move to number 2. Once the problem has been identified, next comes the framing of how the data is collected. Perhaps there's a search for technology in the interest of saving money or time, as opposed to the goal being high quality access. So sometimes there are different interests that come to play and different perspectives that are not always aligned. So there is already an existing disparity when it comes to communication access, and we run the risk of that being exacerbated. So we don't want technology to make a situation worse. So now we understand there is a goal, a problem that needs to be solved, and a process for which to do that. And now we're thinking about an optimal result for a given situation. A member of the deaf community who is a member of a minority community, and the varying competing interests. So there may be the perspective of cost savings, and there's also the deaf person's perspective of wanting equal participation and communication access. So again, there's a balancing of perspectives and interests. So we have the problem, potential solutions, and now we consider the perspective of the deaf community. The goal is communication access. So technology is being designed, which requires some standardization in regards to ASL. But we know our community is so diverse. We have Black ASL, we have new immigrants coming from many different countries, everyone with a unique signing style based on their background and upbringing. Everyone has their own style, yet there are biases that affect which get more attention than others. And so there's a marginalization and there are power dynamics at play with respect to languages. And Ashka mentioned that and stressed the importance of that in her presentation earlier. So once a certain technology is chosen, then we look at systemic implementation. How does the technology get used? And what about quality assurance, ensuring that it's really meeting the needs of the community? Oftentimes, the deaf community perspective is pushed aside. Is this technology that people even want? Maybe some people would say yes, maybe others would say no, because everyone has a unique set of needs. So there is no one size fits all where we can create one technology that meets the needs of such a diverse population. And we haven't even talked yet about deafblind individuals who really do require in-person interpreting services. An interpreter on a screen, we already know with the use of VRI, is not a good match for a deafblind individual, oftentimes. So that is something that we really need to be sure is part of the process in the technology development. The more the deaf perspective is excluded, the more this technology will not work for the end user in the future. So this is the title of the report, DefSafe AI, a legal foundation for ubiquitous automatic interpreting. This was a process that resulted in recommendations about the design of systems and the use of systems in order to minimize the kind of harm that we've seen with past technologies. We're looking at harm reduction with this new technology that we know is coming and increased deaf voices at the table where decisions are being made. The question is it possible to design new technology for justice that really benefits the wide range of people who are members of our community? This is the time to be asking these questions and be proactive about what needs to be considered and how can we be involved to have a seat at the table. Deaf people need to be a part of the decision-making process. From start to finish, I went through each step. We as a community need to have involvement in each and every step of this process, because this will lead to better decisions being made that will be beneficial to everyone involved. This is called a co-designing process, where there's collaboration in the way the new technology is created and implemented for society, with ethical standards being paramount. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Hello again, everyone. It's me, Jeff Shaul. At this point, I would like us to look back at that socio-technical system previously mentioned. This can be used for things such as creating frameworks and ways to do analytical analyses on equity from both a design and designer perspective. We create games, which the artistic principles are already at top of mind, and just ethical design principles are top of mind. At this time, when anyone develops a new system, it's important that they keep paramount the relationship between both readiness and technical quality. Is the quality appropriate and functioning in the way it was designed to function? Additionally, from a community lens, is the market ready for this? And that's something to really think about, is the relationship between these two systems at play. Speaking in regards to the technical quality, this can enable us to do a certain function. However, it can also act as a barrier. One example of this is video relay service technology. We've seen the way that this has changed the game for accessibility. As deaf individuals, we're now able to call anyone, anywhere. However, that technical quality can also become a barrier. One example of this would be texting to 911. If there is an individual who is unable to call or connect with 911 through VRS, they can now text. And so we want to elevate a concept called affordance in contrast to disaffordance, such as disaffordance would be, sorry, there's no technology available for you. We're borrowing this terminology from Chen et al., a colleague of ours in design principles. Affordance means that the technology is allowing us to recognize we are able to utilize the technology to serve a particular function. For example, this chair. Obviously, I'm able to look at this chair and know that I would be able to sit in it. However, disaffordance would mean some people look and cannot and know that this chair is not for them because of physical limitations. Perhaps they are a person who uses a wheelchair. Perhaps they have a back injury. For individuals with for individuals who are low vision, they may look at this white background behind me and recognize it as a barrier. That would be an example of disaffordance. This language gives us a framework to better talk about technical quality then. I apologize. I am aware this slide looks a bit like an egg. You may be hungry. So occasionally I make an omelet. To make an omelet, we know we have to break fruit, a few eggs. However, it's important here to make sure that the mess is at least easy to clean up for continued cooking and future omelets. Now I'm a little hungry. I know we're talking about this before lunch. Let's think a bit now about how ready we are to have this technology incorporated and how much readiness is necessary in these spaces. For example, technology could perhaps easily recognize finger spelling and send that information off into the wild. I'm sure that that technology is out there. However, is the market, is the community currently ready for that finger spelling recognition? There may be errors that could cause potential setbacks. From a design and development perspective, we also need to think about that community readiness. We have pilot studies at play. We have designers who are working on verification and testing in the market space. And it's important for us to think about the affordance rather, for the deaf and hard of hearing community. One example of what this could look like in the real world is this technology usable for us and multiple communicators? Are the forms designed in a way that is user-friendly? It's an art form. It's not a science. We need to develop these technologies to create affordance in a variety of contexts. I don't want to forget to mention here that when we are working through these pilots and beta testing of technology, we need to keep top of mind the results and outcomes and continuing to monitor and evaluate. Is it accurately identifying finger spelling? What about individuals who may be missing a digit? Is it recognizing a variety of body shapes? Again, thinking about use of this in the community at large, is this a risk we're willing to take in potentially continuing to marginalize all minority groups? The solution here is iterative evaluation, consistent feedback, and the ability for individuals to think about the data collection in real time as the results are collected. There need to be metrics and observations consistently taken of, for example, finger spelling recognition, and perhaps focus groups used to better capture consumer comfort when it comes to these technologies. There may be a complaint from one individual. Let's say they are missing a digit, and they give us feedback, which will be able to loop that into the next iterative design. That's an important element in this process for both product and service of our signing community. as I've mentioned, I think it's worthy of repeating. This is not only for the short term, but also for the benefit of long-term results and service. Looking at ongoing use of this kind of finger spelling recognition, we need to continue to keep top of mind individuals that we may need more data samples. Perhaps we start using more Rochester method because this finger spelling technology is becoming more accessible. Or is it? No more Rochester method. Anyway, carrying on then, the finger spelling system, if that was released here today, perhaps individuals would gain an appreciation for it. And that would impact the larger ASL community and our languaging. That's something we need to be mindful of going forward. To bring this all together, again, looking at the egg, you have to break a few eggs to make a good omelet. And I would encourage you here to begin breaking those eggs. Let's talk about how we can use iterative design with justice in mind to create sustainable results for the community long-term, which will serve the deaf individuals as well as the market. My recommendation for you all today is to engage in design and development with this in mind. Now, we are all not designers and developers. I am, but I know many of you here today are not. What's your role in this process? Instead of, this is the space for you to say, this is causing harm, and stop. This is a tough question. I don't have answers to all of these. However, I do believe through collaboration and the power of our collective think tank, we can answer it together. We do need to be cautious about what samples we are choosing to observe and include in our data sets, what metrics are at play. And I do think that there are some sessions coming up which will speak to just that. Finally, my closing thought here is it's important to choose tasks that lead to desired outcomes. What do you want? Have we identified a need? Are we developing technology to meet that need? And how can the iterative process continue to improve that functionality? That's it for me. Tim, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jeff. That was very helpful information for all of us. So now we'll talk some about results and outcomes, what we'd like to see happen. Jeff, you talked about the importance of task selection, because that's what will lead ultimately to the result that we want. But it starts with identifying a problem that eventually leads to an outcome. An important question is, who are the decision makers? And are deaf people involved in that decision-making process? We also need to look at how data collection is done and toward what goal. There are many competing interests at play. Financial interests, pressures due to the lack of available human interpreters, barriers such as travel, geography. The question is, how can technology be used to effectively address some of those challenges? At the same time, how do we balance the needs of the community and deaf and hard of hearing individuals? Technology should not be replacing human interpreters with something that is, in the end, inferior. So we really need to take advantage of the opportunity now, early, to ask these questions and have this dialogue so that we can create priorities. So what we want to do, and the reason we're here today, is to stop perpetuating mistakes of the past that have harmed our community and to reframe this conversation with language justice at the heart of the process. So we know society at large and emerging technologies influence each other. It's a two-way process. And we need to be very mindful as new technologies are created, how they benefit or potentially harm the end users in society. And we know the end users are a wide range of diverse people who come from all kinds of different linguistic and educational and socioeconomic backgrounds. And we need to be inclusive of all when we're looking at what kind of data is used, what kind of metrics are used. We're not only going to be including one part of our community, but looking at the community in all of its aspects. So this has to do with intersectionality when it comes to metrics and benchmarks. So how do we make intersectional benchmarks? And what are the assumptions around inclusion? And who has a seat at the table and who is excluded? And historically, what have the practices been and how can we do better? What kind of resources and investments need to be used? And how can we make sure the process is just? What are assumptions around fairness? What does fairness mean to us? Does it mean each patient gets an equal 15 minutes of a doctor's time? What happens when you have a deaf-blind patient who requires more time? Tactile communication is unique in the amount of time that is required. So do we apply the same frame to every situation involving every individual? We know that is not equity. Equality, where everything is exactly the same for every situation, is not the same as equity. So we need to be mindful of this. What works for one individual, given their background, may not work for another, given their background. And another, again, my example is being mindful of inclusion of the deaf-blind community. What works for the signing deaf community doesn't necessarily work for a deaf-blind individual. So we're working with machine learning and algorithms. And as we're developing this work, we can't apply one frame to all of these different subgroups within our community. From the beginning, we need to build systems that are inclusive of all of the various subgroups that comprise the deaf and hard of hearing and deaf-blind community and all of their various needs. So in the creation of benchmarks, we need to be thoughtful about the process. So I'll draw an analogy to laundry. When we're talking about any process, there's the beginning, there are subsequent steps that lead to user feedback, that result in modification of the process, and then you start that iterative process again and again and again to continue learning and making improvements. So that is what we're looking to do collaboratively with the community, creating that loop of feedback and iteration in the work. We want to introduce technology and ask the question, does this work for you? Tell us how it does, tell us how it doesn't, so that modifications can be made so that technology can improve to better meet your needs. Task identification is an early step. And then feedback from the community is an integral part of the process to make sure what we're doing is beneficial and working. And this, if we do it right, can mitigate discrimination that we've seen happen historically. We can get it right this time. So regardless of identity, background, language use, everyone ultimately, hopefully, will benefit equally and justly from the technology that develops from this process so that it is beneficial. And if it isn't, then we can continue to work on it and make that iterative change to improve it and continue with that loop. With that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us at this symposium. The report findings that we shared with you led to this symposium. So you'll see throughout the weekend, we will have various panels with different tracks. There's the technology track that is our focus today. And then later this afternoon and tomorrow, we will be talking about the social track. So the socio-technical system is our framework for the entire process of the symposium. And today, we're hoping to give you a foundation for that framework. And we'll talk about the legal aspects as well. So after the symposium is over, the conversation will continue. We have 7 minutes now. We could open it up for questions and answers and also address the CEU paperwork process for those online. So you can use this time before lunch to fill out your CEU paperwork, and we're going to have a working lunch. So for those who are here on site, you don't need to be concerned about CEUs. Take time to network, to enjoy some food at the same time, meet each other, and continue talking about the impacts of AI on the interpreting field. And think about your goals and what you'd like to see happen, what equity looks like in technology design. Share your perspectives from your various areas of expertise with each other. Are there any questions? Christian, can you come up front, please?
Where should I stand? That was a lovely presentation. I do have some questions, but I also want to throw in some thoughts that I had. So I want to focus on the outcomes. I agree with you. And recruiting the deaf community in to be a part of the outcomes is extremely valuable and extremely important. However, just playing devil's advocate a little bit. We make assumptions. We assume that the community always knows best and what those outcomes and goals should be. And in no way am I trying to exclude anybody or the community. I value the perspectives and feedback from the community. It's integral to the process. However, let me provide you an example of what I'm thinking might cause issues as well. For example, if you look at the research on captioning, closed captioning, we have a strong partnership with the community. We began the project fully aligned with the community needs, and we had similar beliefs and values. We felt that captionings need to be accurate. It needed to include every word and all the information that was going on should be included within those captions. Then we found some information within the research that there were some contradictions. For example, when retrieving information from the community, some folks felt that the information was too overwhelming. They couldn't keep up with the captions. Some folks liked what they were reading and some could not follow it. So then we had to figure out, okay, what are our options? What are next steps? How can we address these issues? What are our options? One option was to just leave it the way it was. Another option was to maybe pause whatever was being watched and let the captions go a little bit so for folks to catch up. Then there was another option of decreasing the amount of information within the captions so people could follow better. So that's an interesting perspective. So maybe, like I said, with the option of slowing down the video, what the general opinion would be on the video, or reading caption verbatim, like having everything included in the captions. In the beginning, folks wanted everything included, and then it turned out, okay, well, I'm trying to watch this video, but there was too much information in the captions. Most people chose slowing down the video as the option. So the outcomes and the community goals also need to be looked at simultaneously, and we need to keep in mind for our future outcomes and using science to justify those outcomes. I think that is also going to be a challenge.
I have a response, if I may. Thank you, Christian, for the valid points you bring forth here. I will say that occasionally the community, as you said, does not necessarily know how to articulate what they want and what they need. And science does need to justify whatever the outcome is for those objectives. I do think it's a quote comes to mind. This is by Henry Ford, the famous automotive manufacturer and trailblazer. He once said that if people would like to go fast, why don't they get faster horses? Really, the car is the better solution. So again, there are environmental concerns aside here. I thought about Henry Ford's quote regarding horses versus automobiles. That's what you bring to mind here.
Thank you. So this is a perfect time. We have 1 minute before 12:30 when lunch is served. There are leftovers still here from this morning available. We are also bringing in sandwiches, more fruit for you, coffee, beverages. It's all set up in the other room. But this has been an excellent start to the conversation. So digest what you've learned so far. Think about how it will apply and play out in the future in the field of sign language interpreting. Enjoy your lunch break as you peruse and think about all that we've presented this morning, and you network with each other. Enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you at 1:30.